year was 1834, a time when science was still in its infancy and the mysteries of life often found explanation only in faith or superstition. In a small European village, surrounded by endless fields and rivers that carried whispers of old legends, a midwife was called in the dead of night. A farmer's wife had gone into labor, and the entire household braced itself for what they thought would be another ordinary birth. But fate had decided otherwise. The candlelight flickered against the wooden walls as the cries of pain echoed. Outside, snow fell silently, blanketing the earth in stillness, while inside, the air was tense with expectation. After long hours of struggle, the midwife finally held in her trembling hands not one child, but two. And they were joined. A hush fell over the room. The father, a strong man hardened by years of toil, stood frozen, his eyes wide in disbelief. He had prepared himself for joy, for the first cries of his children, but what he saw stole the words from his mouth. The twins were connected at the chest, their tiny hearts beating as though in one rhythm. Their mother, pale and exhausted, reached out her weak arms, whispering in tears, "They are mine, let me hold them." In that moment, what others saw as an omen, she saw as a gift. By morning, word had spread. In those days, unusual births often sparked fear. Neighbors whispered of curses, of punishments from God, of signs that the end of times was near. Some said the children would not last a day. Others pitied the mother, believing her heart would be broken by their quick death. Yet, against all expectations, the boys cried with strength. Their tiny lungs filled the cottage with a sound that silenced the whispers. Day turned into night, and still, they lived. The midwife, who had attended dozens of births, admitted she had never seen such a thing. No book, no physician's lecture, no healer's tale could explain it. The villagers, once certain the children would die, now watched in awe as each day passed. What began as fear slowly turned into reluctant respect. People would come secretly to catch a glimpse of them, their eyes filled with both curiosity and wonder. Some muttered, "Science cannot explain this." Others said softly, "Perhaps God has chosen them." The farmer's wife, frail from childbirth, became a fortress of strength. She ignored the gossip and the fearful looks. She named her sons after saints, as if to shield them with holiness. While others doubted, she nurtured them with fierce determination. She sang lullabies to them, not as two, but as one soul resting in her arms. Often, late at night, when her husband sat in silence by the fire, she would whisper, "They will live. I feel it." And indeed, her faith became the force that carried them through their first fragile months. Where medicine had no cure, a mother's love became the most powerful healing of all. The first year of their life was the greatest test. Many children of that era died from simple fevers or hunger. For these twins, the risk was doubled. If one fell ill, the other followed. Their survival was not just unlikely, it was near impossible. Yet every time sickness struck, they endured. Their mother would pray through the night, holding them close to her chest, and by dawn they would be breathing again, fragile but alive. It was as though fate had written a stubborn story for them. They were not meant to die yet. By the age of 2, they were not only alive, but strong. They crawled together, laughed together, and reached out for the world with tiny hands that clung to life. Their father, once a man of doubt, began to see them differently. He carved them a wooden cradle big enough for 2, and when he carried them to the fields, he no longer hung his head in shame. Instead, he stood tall, as if daring anyone to call his children a curse. The village priest, who had baptized countless infants, admitted during a sermon, "We live in times where we believe science has answers, but these children remind us that there are mysteries beyond our understanding. Perhaps they are not a punishment, but a miracle to show us humility." His words softened the hearts of many. People who once avoided the family now came to see the boys not as monsters but as survivors. Their very existence defied nature, medicine, and human expectation. In a world where life was fragile and death constant, the twins became living proof that strength could come from the most unexpected forms. Looking back, it is easy to see why their birth was called unnatural, a defiance of nature itself. But what the villagers slowly learned was that it was not their form that defined them. It was their will to live. Born in a time when the world had no answers, these twins became the question itself. What does it mean to be alive? If life is about perfection, they were flawed. If life is about survival, they were victorious. If life is about purpose, then surely theirs was to teach others that no condition, no circumstance, no beginning is too strange to hold meaning. Their first breath was not just the start of their story, but the beginning of a lesson that would echo far beyond their small village, that even a life deemed impossible can shine as proof of resilience. Childhood, for most children, is a season of play, laughter, and innocent exploration. For the twins born in 1834, however, childhood was both a gift and a burden. They had already defied nature by surviving their fragile infancy, but survival was only the beginning. Growing up in a world that did not understand them meant living under the constant gaze of others, sometimes curious, sometimes cruel, often unforgiving. Learning to walk was their first great challenge. Unlike other children, the twins could not rise independently. Each time one tried to take a step, the other's balance faltered. Falls were frequent, bruises unavoidable. But day after day, they tried again. Their mother, ever patient, would hold their small hands, guiding them slowly, encouraging them with the same words she repeated since their birth. You are not two bodies broken. You are one strength united. After months of struggle, something remarkable happened. The twins learned to move not by fighting against each other, but by cooperating, one leading with his left foot, the other with his right. Soon, they walked the fields together, their steps unsteady but determined. Every step they took became a symbol of unity, teaching them a lesson that would carry them through life. They would only move forward if they did it together. As they grew older, the boys longed to play with other children of the village. But the games of hide and seek, running races, or climbing trees were things they could not do easily. When they tried to join in, laughter often followed. Not laughter of joy, but of mockery. Two-headed monster. Some children would jeer. Why don't you crawl back to where you came from? The words cut deep. They would go home in silence, their mother wiping away their tears, whispering that cruelty often comes from ignorance. Still, the sting of rejection was real. For every insult, though, the twins made a pact between themselves. If the world will not accept us, we will accept each other completely. Instead of games, they created their own forms of play. They carved wooden toys, invented songs only they understood, and told each other stories before sleep. Though the world pushed them to the margins, they built a secret kingdom of brotherhood no one could break. The strength of their mother became their shield. Whenever they returned from the village with hearts heavy from mockery, she would kneel before them and say, "Do not curse your difference. God chose you not to be laughed at, but to show the world something they do not yet understand." Her words slowly planted seeds of resilience in their hearts. Where others saw weakness, they began to see uniqueness. If one of them felt ashamed, the other reminded him of their mother's voice. Together, we are more than whole. By the age of 8, the twins had begun attending lessons at the small village school. At first, even the teacher hesitated. He worried they would be a distraction, that the other children would not focus. But their hunger to learn soon silenced all doubts. While one boy struggled with mathematics, the other quickly grasped it and explained the numbers aloud. While one stumbled over letters, the other read confidently, sharing the rhythm of the words. It was as if their minds were meant to complete what the other lacked. The teacher, astonished, once said to the class, "Individually, they may have been ordinary boys, but together they are extraordinary." Slowly, the taunts of their peers gave way to curiosity. Children began to ask them for help with lessons. Though friendship was still fragile, respect was being born. Childhood was not without suffering. Illness struck them more than once. A simple fever that might weaken one child nearly killed them both. Their father, though hardened by years of poverty, often sat at their bedside in helpless despair. Yet each time they fought back. Their bodies, though fragile in appearance, carried a will far stronger than anyone expected. And in every moment of pain, they whispered to each other, "We will not let go." If one coughed in fever, the other rubbed his back. If one shivered in chills, the other pressed closer for warmth. Their bond was not just of flesh. It was of spirit, forged in struggle, tempered by pain. One summer's day when they were about 10, the twins found themselves cornered by a group of older boys. The teasing began again, shouts of freaks and monsters. But this time, instead of crying or running, the twins stood firm. One of them spoke with a calm strength that surprised everyone. Yes, we are joined. Yes, we are different, but we are alive, and we are stronger than you, because we will never be alone. The bullies, caught off guard, said nothing. For the first time, the twins did not feel shame. They felt pride. That moment marked a change, not just in how they saw themselves, but in how others began to see them. By enduring ridicule, isolation, and pain, the twins had unknowingly discovered something greater than acceptance, resilience. They learned that strength is not measured by how easily one's life fits the mold of society, but by how courageously one lives outside it. Every insult hardened them. Every rejection drew them closer. Every struggle carved into their souls a lesson that others might never learn in a lifetime, that unity can turn weakness into power, and that the world's cruelty can be answered with dignity. By the end of their childhood years, the twins had faced more battles than most adults. They had learned to walk against the odds, endured the sting of rejection, survived illnesses that should have killed them, and found wisdom in pain. Though the world still called them strange, they no longer saw themselves through the eyes of others. Instead, they saw themselves as survivors, as brothers bound not just by body but by destiny. Their struggle had not broken them, it had forged them. And as they stepped into their teenage years, they carried within them a strength that no insult, no illness, no ridicule could destroy. By the time the twins reached their teenage years, something extraordinary began to reveal itself. For so long their lives had been defined by what people could see: their shared body, their conjoined chests, their unusual walk. But as they grew older, it became clear that what made them remarkable was not their body at all. It was their mind. They had survived ridicule, illness, and hardship, and now they were about to show the world that true greatness often hides where no one expects it. While other children of the village were satisfied with games and chores, the twins' curiosity stretched far beyond. They wanted to know how the stars moved across the sky, why the river rose during spring rains, why sickness took some lives and spared others. Their small home, filled with the smell of wood smoke and bread, became a place of constant questions. Their mother, though uneducated, encouraged them. If God gave you two minds, it is because he wanted you to think twice as deep, she often said, and so they did. At night they would argue and debate, their voices rising and falling like two instruments in a single melody. Villagers who passed by their home would sometimes pause outside the window, listening to the strange sound of two boys, fused in flesh, engaged in passionate discussions about the mysteries of life. The village schoolmaster soon realized that the twins were unlike any pupils he had ever taught. When he asked a question, one twin would begin the answer, and the other would complete it without hesitation, as if their thoughts were threads woven into the same cloth. When one boy struggled to understand a passage of scripture, the other explained it with surprising clarity. When one failed to solve a mathematical problem, the other filled in the missing steps with ease. It was as though they carried one mind spread across two perspectives, two mirrors reflecting the same truth from different angles. The schoolmaster, who once doubted their presence in his classroom, became their champion. He declared to the villagers, "These boys are proof that the human spirit is greater than the body. They may be joined in flesh, but their minds are freer than most of ours will ever be." Though their bodies were bound, their personalities blossomed in unique ways. One twin had a love for music. He could craft simple flutes from reeds and play melodies that made birds pause in the trees. The other was drawn to stories and history, memorizing tales of kings, battles, and far-off lands. When they worked together, their talents combined beautifully. The music of one gave rhythm to the stories of the other, and the stories gave meaning to the melodies. Villagers began to invite them to gatherings where they performed together, one playing tunes while the other told heroic tales. For the first time, the people did not see them as freaks or burdens. They saw them as entertainers, as teachers, as boys who had something valuable to offer. As they grew older, the twins began to wrestle with deeper questions. Why had they been born this way? Was it punishment, a lesson, or a simple accident of nature? In a time when science was still crude and religion held sway, such questions were rarely asked aloud. Yet the twins dared to ask them. They would spend hours in the presence of the village priest, debating matters of faith. One twin argued that everything had divine purpose. The other challenged, saying perhaps life was chance, and their bond a mystery even God had not explained. The priest, instead of silencing them, encouraged their questions. "It is not sin to seek truth," he said. "Perhaps your very difference was meant to stir questions others are too afraid to ask." Through these debates, their minds sharpened like blades struck upon stone. By their mid-teens, the twins had become a quiet source of wisdom for the village. Farmers sought their advice when crops failed. Mothers asked them to tell stories to restless children. Even elders sat with them in the evenings, listening to their unusual perspectives. They were still different, yes, still stared at by strangers, still whispered about by travelers passing through. But within their community, respect had grown. People began to see them not for their strange body, but for their extraordinary minds. The greatest lesson the twins gave the world was that the human body, however unusual, however fragile, is not the true measure of a person. The mind, the seat of thought, of creativity, of love, is where true strength lies. Though joined in flesh, they were free in thought. They proved that physical limits do not chain the imagination, and that unity can amplify brilliance. If one alone was ordinary, together they became extraordinary. It is easy to measure people by what we see, their appearance, their health, their wealth, or their strength. But the twins of 1834 remind us that true greatness often lies hidden beneath the surface. Their bodies may have confined them, but their minds soared beyond boundaries. They teach us that no matter how we are born, no matter what chains the world places on us, our thoughts, our wisdom, and our creativity remain untouchable. And sometimes, the very differences that seem to hold us back are the ones that give us the greatest strength. By the time they reached early manhood, the twins had already changed the way their village thought about life, faith, and possibility. They had moved from being mocked as children to being respected as thinkers, storytellers, and teachers. Their lives became living proof that the mind is greater than the body, and that no limitation, not even being born in a single body, can stop the human spirit from shining. As the twins moved from the wonder of childhood into the fragile years of early manhood, a dark truth lingered over them, one they could never escape. Their very lives, though extraordinary, were bound to a reality both cruel and undeniable. They could not live or die apart. From the day of their birth, people had whispered that their lives were borrowed time. Every illness that came upon them was not just a threat, but a reminder of their shared fate. It was as if death itself stood at their doorstep, waiting for a moment of weakness to knock. And yet, instead of running from that shadow, the twins learned to live within it. In the harsh winters of the 1800s, sickness swept through villages like a thief in the night. When one twin caught a cold, it was never his alone. The fever that burned in one body soon spread to the other, their shared blood carrying both sickness and suffering. There were nights when their parents feared they would not survive until morning. One twin would cough violently, his body racked with pain, while the other gasped for air as though suffering the same torment. Their mother sat beside them, her hands folded in desperate prayer, whispering, "If one must stay, let both stay. Do not take them one without the other." To watch her sons suffer together was a torment no mother should bear, yet she never abandoned hope. Each time death came close, the twins clung to one another, whispering encouragement even in delirium. "Hold on, don't leave me. If you go, I go with you." By now, the entire village had come to see the twins not as curiosities, but as symbols of survival. Each brush with death drew people closer to them. Neighbors brought herbs, teas, and remedies. Some prayed at their bedside, others simply stood in silence, unable to explain how the boys continued to endure what should have broken them. A farmer once remarked, "They live on faith and on each other." If they were two, they would already be gone. But together, they refused to let death win. In those days, when medicine was scarce and explanations fewer, their survival seemed like a miracle that defied all reason. Despite their resilience, the twins themselves were not blind to their condition. They often spoke of it privately, in the quiet of their room when the world outside was asleep. "Brother, what happens if one of us dies first?" one whispered. "Then I will follow you. We were born together. We cannot live apart. But are you afraid?" "Yes, but not of death. I am afraid of leaving you behind, even for a moment." These late night conversations revealed a truth deeper than their shared body. They had long accepted death as their companion. But what they could not accept was separation. Living under death's shadow might have filled their days with fear, but instead, it gave them a profound sense of gratitude. Where others wasted time, they savored it. A sunrise was not simply another morning, it was proof they had survived the night. A simple meal was not just bread and broth. It was a blessing they were still alive to share. Their mother often said, "You value life more than anyone I've ever known." Most of us forget how precious it is. You remind us daily. Indeed, their constant closeness to death made every breath sacred, every moment a victory. The village priest remained a steady presence in their lives. He would visit them during sickness, reading psalms, reminding them that life and death were both part of God's design. One twin once asked him directly, "Why did God make us like this? Joined together, unable to live alone?" The priest paused, then answered softly, "Perhaps because he wanted to show the world that love and unity are stronger than death. Alone, you might have been forgotten. Together, you are unforgettable." These words comforted the twins. They began to believe that their unusual existence was not a curse, but a mission, to remind others of the strength found in togetherness. As they reached their late teens, the twins grew stronger in spirit, but remained fragile in health. Every winter brought new threats, every summer new exhaustion. Even a small cut or infection could spiral into a life-threatening danger. Death was never far. It was the shadow cast across every joy, the silent guest at every meal, the unseen watcher at every gathering. But instead of bowing to it, they learned to walk in its company. "If death follows us," one said, "let us at least teach it to walk slower by laughing, by learning, by living fully." Their attitude began to change those around them. People who once complained about small troubles, bad harvests, broken tools, family disputes, found their words faltering when they looked at the twins. If two boys bound together by a fragile body could smile, could study, could entertain, could debate about God and the universe, then what excuse did anyone else have to live in misery? Their struggle gave others courage. Their shadow gave others light. The twins never stopped dreaming. They spoke of places they longed to see, books they hoped to read, and ideas they wished to share. Though they knew their time might be short, they never allowed fear to steal their vision of life. Instead of waiting for death, they prepared for it by living as fully as they could. In every word they spoke, in every smile they gave, they showed the world that death is not the enemy. It is only the reminder that life must be cherished while it lasts. The shadow of death followed them from the moment of birth. It frightened their parents, it worried their neighbors, it kept doctors and priests awake at night. But for the twins themselves, that shadow became their greatest teacher. It taught them to love fiercely, to live gratefully, to endure suffering without surrender. And most of all, it taught them that while bodies are fragile, the human spirit is unbreakable. The year was coming to a close. It was the harsh winter of 1834. The coldest the village had seen in decades. Snow covered the rooftops like heavy blankets, and the winds howled through cracks in the wooden cottages. Inside one small farmhouse, the family sat quietly, aware that the moment they had long dreaded might finally be upon them. The twins, now nearly 20, had lived longer than anyone had ever imagined possible. Doctors had predicted days, neighbors had whispered weeks, and even their parents once feared they would not see their first birthday. But the boys had defied all those expectations, walking into manhood together. Yet the shadow of death that had followed them all their lives now loomed larger than ever. It began with a fever. At first, it seemed harmless, An ordinary winter illness. One twin coughed lightly, then grew tired. But as the days passed, the fever refused to break. His eyes became heavy, his breathing shallow. The other twin, though still alert, felt the sickness pulling at him too. Their shared body meant that pain in one heart echoed in the other. He refused to rest, sitting upright and holding his brother's hand, whispering words of encouragement. "Don't leave me, we've come too far. We survived every storm, every sickness. We will survive this too." But deep down he knew something was different this time. This was not the usual fever they had conquered before. This was the beginning of their farewell. Their parents hovered helplessly. Their mother, older now and worn with years of worry, prayed endlessly at their bedside. Their father sat in silence, his face carved with lines of sorrow. For 2 decades he had carried the burden of fear of losing them, fear of how the world treated them, fear of their suffering. And now, that burden was heavier than ever. Neighbors came to pay their respects, some carrying herbs, some bringing blankets, others only tears. The small farmhouse, once filled with the twins' debates and laughter, was now filled with a heavy silence. As the sick twin's strength waned, the healthy one became his guardian. He wiped his brother's brow, lifted water to his lips, and whispered prayers into his ear. For hours, he refused to sleep, refusing to let his brother drift away alone. "If you close your eyes, I will close mine too. We were born together. We will die together." Their bond, which had carried them through every trial, now faced its greatest test. On a night when the winds outside screamed like mourners, the fevered twins' breathing grew slower, weaker, until it was barely a whisper. His head rested against his brother's shoulder, his hand clutching his brother's tightly. The family gathered around, candles flickering, shadows dancing on the walls. The priest whispered prayers for peace, his voice trembling. And then, as dawn threatened to break through the frost-covered windows, one heart gave way. The sick twin let out one final breath, his face softening in release. His brother cried out, not in fear, but in anguish. He held him tighter, refusing to let go. Minutes later, as though unwilling to live a second without him, the surviving twin's breath slowed, faltered, and stopped. One death followed the other like a shadow follows light. Their souls, which had never known separation in life, refused to part in death. News of their passing spread quickly. The villagers, once cruel in their childhood, now wept openly. Bells tolled from the church tower, not just for 2 young men, but for a miracle that had lived among them. People who had once whispered, "Curse," now whispered, "Blessing." Those who had once mocked now stood in silence, humbled by the twins' courage. Farmers, children, mothers and elders alike walked through the snow to pay their respects. For years, the twins had been symbols of survival. In their death, they became symbols of unity. Their parents refused to bury them apart. A single coffin was made large enough to hold both. Side by side, they were placed gently within, as they had lived every day of their lives. The funeral procession wound slowly through the village. Snowflakes fell like silent tears from the heavens. Candles burned along the path as mourners carried the coffin to the churchyard. When the grave was dug, it was not seen as a burial of tragedy, but as the resting place of a lesson too profound to forget. Their tombstone bore simple words: born together, lived together, died together, forever one. For weeks after their passing, the village remained changed. People spoke with more kindness, argued less bitterly, and gave thanks more often. For in the twins, they had seen the fragility of life and the power of love. Their story spread beyond the village, carried by travelers and preachers. Some told it as a mystery science could not explain, others told it as a miracle of faith. But all agreed, the twins had shown the world what it means to live not in selfishness but in unity. Their departure was not the end, but the final chapter of a story that had always been about more than survival. It was about resilience, love, and the power of human spirit. They had shown that life is not measured by length, but by depth, not by how perfect the body is, but by how strong the soul becomes. And in their death, they proved that bonds of love are stronger even than death itself. The twins of 1834 remind us all that life is short, fragile, and uncertain. But if lived with love, courage, and unity, even a short life can echo for generations. They were born together, they lived through ridicule and hardship, and when the time came, they faced death with the same unbreakable bond that had defined them from the start. Their day of departure was not a defeat. It was the fulfillment of their destiny, to leave the world not as two broken souls, but as one unshakable legacy. When the cold earth closed over the coffin of the twins in the winter of 1834, their village mourned deeply. For years, people had watched them grow, stumble, rise, and endure what no one else could. In life, they had been whispers of mystery. In death, they became a story no one would forget. But their true legacy was not written in stone or in the cold ground. It lived in the hearts of those who had witnessed their journey. At first, the twins' grave was just another mound of earth in the churchyard. But slowly, people began to gather there. Mothers brought their children, pointing at the carved words on the tombstone, born together, lived together, died together, forever one. Farmers left small offerings of grain after harvest. Women lit candles on winter nights. The grave became more than a resting place. It became a symbol. For some, it was a reminder of the fragility of life. For others, it was proof that love and unity could outlast suffering. And for many, it was a lesson in humility, that science and human knowledge, however advanced, could not always explain the mysteries of existence. In their childhood, the twins had been mocked as monsters. But after their death, no one dared speak of them with cruelty. Children who once threw stones now brought flowers. Men who once laughed at them now lowered their heads in shame when they passed the grave. Their memory had transformed from ridicule to reverence. Their lives had forced the village to confront its own failings. How often had they judged what they did not understand? How quickly had they condemned what was different? The twins' story reminded them that greatness can grow in the soil of struggle, and that sometimes what the world first rejects, it later honors. The schoolmaster, who had once doubted the twins' place in his classroom, became one of the loudest voices in preserving their memory. He told new students stories of how the boys debated, how they completed each other's lessons, how their minds outshone their bodies. "Remember," he would say, standing tall before his pupils, "you are not defined by what others see in you. You are defined by the fire of your spirit." The twins proved that wisdom and courage matter more than any shape of flesh. For years, this became a lesson passed down in the little schoolhouse, inspiring generations of children not to look at difference with fear, but with respect. The village priest, too, often spoke of the twins in his sermons. He described their life as a living parable. "We are born alone and we die alone," he would say, "but not these two. They showed us that love so deep, unity so strong, can carry us even into death. If they could endure together what none of us could bear alone, then surely we can endure our burdens with faith and with love." His words drew visitors from surrounding towns. Some came to hear about the mystery twins. Others came seeking comfort in their story. The grave became a quiet pilgrimage site, where strangers whispered prayers not for the boys, but for themselves, that they too might live with such resilience. Travelers who heard of the twins carried their story beyond the snowy valley. Some told it as a medical curiosity, a marvel science could not explain. But more often, the tale was shared as a story of courage. By the mid-19th century, their lives had become a local legend. The boys who were born together, mocked as children, respected as men, and who chose even in death not to part. The story reached cities and universities, where physicians puzzled over the mystery. But poets and preachers drew from it inspiration. For some, the twins became proof that destiny is stronger than flesh. For others, they became proof that love itself is life's greatest strength. Perhaps the greatest legacy the twins left was not in the tales told of them, but in the quiet changes they inspired in ordinary lives. A farmer who once despised his crippled son began to love him more tenderly after seeing the twins' perseverance. A mother who once feared her daughter's limp found courage to send her to school, remembering how the twins' minds shone brighter than their weakness. Even in death, the twins gave others permission to see their own struggles not as shame, but as strength. The story of the twins speaks across centuries. Life is not about perfection, but about resilience. They were never meant to fit the world's definition of normal. Yet in their refusal to surrender, they taught lessons greater than many long-lived men ever could. Their legacy reminds us that weakness can become strength when faced with unity. Pain can give birth to wisdom. The difference can be the seed of greatness. And love, true love between souls, can defy even death. Today, no one remembers the names of every villager, farmer, or traveler who once walked the snowy roads of that little European town. But the memory of the twins endures. Their lives were brief, their bodies fragile, yet their story survives because it speaks to the deepest part of the human heart. In every age, people are born into circumstances they cannot change. Poverty, illness, weakness, or rejection. The twins of 1834 prove that these beginnings do not define the end. They remind us that even in limitation, one can live with dignity, courage, and meaning. Though their bodies lie beneath the earth, their lesson still walks among us. We are stronger together. We are braver when we love. And though death may come, the legacy of a life lived with purpose will never fade.